good to see you taking an interest in this topic. Just so I perhaps just reiterate my background, it's quite important to just sort of emphasize the fact that I'm very much from the occupier side of the business, actually. Running ISA, which I currently do as Secretary General, we focus in on the investors and on the occupiers. But my background is very much managing large estates from an occupational perspective. It's interesting that probably now 5 years ago, sustainability started to creep into our the way we managed our estate and how we decided to, our strategies. Strategies prior to that were always around the number of people, the cost of the building, the locations, and so on. And all of a sudden you got this fourth element, which was the sustainability. I have to say, to a large degree, it was about, we didn't want to be caught with unsustainable buildings for all sorts of reasons. They were costly, they weren't very good from a public perspective, they weren't very good from your people's perspective. But it seems that sustainability has come from literally nowhere to one of the main pillars of delivering a corporate strategy for your properties. So that's by way of an introduction, and I've got about, I'll put that down there, it's easy. I've got about 20 minutes, I think, haven't I? So I'll just, you nudge me when I go over. Kick me, yes, I think, yes. Okay, get this right. We kind of all know this stuff. I always put it in front of any presentation I do, just to remind us why we're doing this. And you heard me sort of say in the main hall there that I think it's actually legislation tends to drive whatever legislation wishes to drive, in this case sustainable behaviour. And behind that is the fact that buildings are responsible for a lot of our CO2 emissions and other, obviously, waste and water and so on. But the real characteristic of buildings is that the emissions account for, the carbon emissions are 75% of the operation of a building. It is during the course of operating a building. So again, my perspective when I was running these estates was very much around how can we reduce those costs. I'm not using it here, but it's interesting that I sometimes use a little pie graph. And I used to manage budgets, of about £1 billion or more a year. And you would then look at the budget. So you'd start, as you do in any company, you start the year with a very large budget. The finance director comes to you halfway through the year and says, cut the budget. And they'd look at £1 billion and say, you must be able to cut £100 million out of this budget. It is only 10%. Well, you can't, because actually a third of the budget is depreciation. You can't do anything about that. A third of the budget is actually probably your rents and other contracted items. A third of your budget will just be the running costs of the building. That's the only thing that you can affect during the course of the year. So it's really important to focus in on the energy efficiency. So again, my perspective, whilst it is very important, I think, to be green, economically it is very important as well. So sustainability, for all sorts of reasons, is not an option. As I've been running ISA, I come across a huge number of companies around Europe. An increasing number of these companies actually want to make their operations sustainable. That is a driving force for them. ISA is there because these companies require a method of collecting data, measuring performance and setting goals, and I'll just do a tiny little bit about that at the end to demonstrate how we actually achieve that for the companies who are members. It's not a commercial organisation, it's a membership organisation. And I picked up this sort of particular small quote, which is that low carbon companies outperform in the stock market, and I think increasingly they will. It's no coincidence, is it, that people like Tesco's or some of the large supermarkets, make a big play about using fewer and fewer plastic bags. Economically, it makes sense as well as environmentally. But such companies, we have now a huge number of companies that actually demonstrate responsibility and leadership in the sustainable field. I was with Jacina a couple of weeks ago in Paris, and they are a huge company, but they're very much at the forefront of sustainability in France. They lead a lot of the discussions in France currently. They have massive holdings of 11.8 billion euros, and their policy is to be leaders in the field of sustainability, and their investment is geared towards a sustainable policy which will enhance their performance. So they actually see this as they have to obviously make money, they have to be profitable, they have to invest in the right properties, and they see sustainability as a main pillar of doing that. Hammerson, who you'll be aware, is a UK-listed real estate investment trust with a portfolio primarily in the UK and France. And it has quite a clear, if you go on their website, it has quite a clear sustainability policy to substantially reduce their carbon footprint and maximise the efficiency of use of natural resources, reduce waste and recycling, and so on. You can read the topics up there. Again, I've seen presentations where people have compared the performance of some of these listed property companies. Hammerson tends to come out as one of the best performers, or did up until a year or so ago, in the market. So there is a real correlation between, I think, actually behaving sustainability and being a leading company, a profitable company, and so on. Redevco, I put Redevco in the Netherlands, so I know quite well. They are an independent company, they're not listed, so they perhaps don't have quite the shareholder pressures, the stakeholder pressures that you would that you expect from a listed company. But they actually are very keen on sustainability and inspiring sustainable solutions. They target EPCs, which was a point I made earlier, for all their EU property. And they see, and I think the important, why I put them in, was this important bullet point, that they see consumption by tenants as a shared responsibility. Right now we have quite an issue as to how we measure the performance of buildings. You have on the one hand your investors, they are responsible maybe for the common parts, and then you have the tenants who are responsible for their own little area and the energy consumption in those areas. And somehow we need to really genuinely make a difference, you need to bring the two together. Redevco, frankly, can do that a lot easier than many because its main tenant is C&A. They are obviously sister companies. So there is this shared responsibility, which I think is a bit of an issue at the moment we need to drive towards solving. And I put up here some of the other companies, all of whom, I think, nearly all, are members of ISA because they take sustainability seriously. ECE are a very large retail investor and developer in Germany. Aberdeen Asset Management use property investments, either direct or indirect, as a way of producing value. Corio in the Netherlands actually produce their shopping centres. Interesting with shopping centres, the retailers have a real issue now. How do we actually get people to come and shop in the high street or in our shopping centres rather than doing it online? So they're increasingly seeing the big shopping centre owners that it has to be an experience to go to a shopping centre. It's a day out. There's lots more than just sort of shopping. There's obviously the sort of lunching, there's the coffee breaks, and there's all sorts of things. And sustainability is part of that package. You can come to a very sustainable environment. Of course, you may have to drive there, which rather kills it at the moment, but we'll get over that at some stage. Unibail-Rodamco, again, I think are probably the largest developer of retail in Europe, and they are very much focused on investment. All these companies are not doing this, they are doing it. Actually, funny enough, I do think genuinely, because a lot of them are members, and genuinely they do feel that they should be doing something about the environment in which we all live, and they do want to improve the sustainable performance of their property. But there has to be a bottom line, there has to be a business case. And they need to understand what that business case is, and I can perhaps cover a bit later on that. The market, there is a market case in any event for measurement of the sustainable performance of property. It's becoming a source, I think, of competitive advantage. Certainly, if you have a direct or indirect investor like Aberdeen Asset, they're going to look at the fund managers, and they now want to know what the sustainability policy is of those funds before they invest in those funds. So if those funds don't have an investment policy, a sustainable policy, they won't be invested in by Aberdeen, and increasingly other sort of large, certainly indirect investors like PGGM in the Netherlands. There was some research by Maastricht University, this was just in the UK, which showed that BREEAM ratings, which are an indication when all said and done of the sustainability of a building, can have a really positive effect on rental and sales. So I think that's clear market evidence. I quite like the Australian Neighbours scheme, and I understand I've no direct experience of this, but actually the scheme rating that they have does have an impact on whether buildings can be sold more easily or less easily. It is seen as a sort of an indicator of the value of that sort of property. And therefore, I think as that happens, maybe, let's say with our own EPCs or whatever it is, you'll slowly find that actually these sort of schemes have a real impact on value. So my experience is that the best companies in Europe do adopt sustainability as an integral part of their corporate responsibility. I guess here in Dublin, one of your objectives is to attract the best companies in Europe to have their headquarters here or whatever it is, and we saw that with Google, which is an amazing, it's incredible how they have sort of come here. They are attracted to this place, and you need lots more companies like them, I suspect. Therefore, they will all have sustainable policies. You will have to adapt whatever you do in order to meet their sustainable policies and encourage them to come here. They have this commitment to transparency and improving their impact in society and the environment. The CR index, it's interesting that I only picked this up by chance, but in the FT a few weeks ago was the Corporate Responsibility Index in the UK. Now, all these companies are prepared to be rated as to whether they're improving their corporate responsibility or actually they're getting better, they're staying the same, and in some cases they have got worse. A major part of corporate responsibility now is sustainability. I know that from my days at HBOS. I used to sit on the corporate responsibility committee because property was a major factor in our corporate, in getting a good position on that index whilst we were still solvent, that was. So businesses will increasingly be required to take responsibility for the consequences of their actions. They'll be required by their stakeholders, by their people, by their shareholders, whoever it is. There's an enormous pressure now on businesses. What you cannot measure, of course, you cannot manage. The ISA is an independent organisation. It's a members' organisation. It's a not-for-profit organisation. And the data is held by the BREs, which is a charity, so nobody can get their hands on the data and use it for commercial purposes. But we are dedicated to achieving a more sustainable built environment, and we use KPIs, key performance indicators, to measure the performance. And if I just those are just some of the members currently. So you can see they're very large companies around Europe. Very large companies are taking sustainability really seriously, which is the message there. We had our first benchmark in 2011. There'll be another benchmark launched later this year. And we're using three critical KPIs, energy, water, and CO2 by floor area. And it's the intensity of use, which is the important thing there. So we actually know the intensity per metre square or whatever it is. We focused in on those countries, and we focused in on office and shopping centres. The idea is that then ISA members themselves can compare their performance across the board, and we do this we have an ISA online system, so you upload the data very simply, which is important. We need to make it a lot simpler, to be honest. It can be very time-consuming. The most time-consuming bit is getting the data on the system, inevitably. But once it's there, and it's there for all time, and you can use it for all sorts of other purposes. You can use it to get your certification. It's relatively easy to get a BREEAM and use certificate at the moment. One of my objectives would be to make certain it's as easy to get a LEED certificate or whatever the certificate is, appropriate to the country. If we look just at one sort of KPI 3, the energy intensity, and you can see that we have created an energy benchmark, which is just above 200 there, and where the countries sort of sit at the moment in relationship to that benchmark. Some look incredibly good, you have to say. So the idea of benchmarks like this is to identify, well, that can't be right. There is something wrong here. We're not doing it correctly. We're not uploading the data correctly, or were you just picking one property in a particular country? As the database gets larger, clearly it will be of much more use. But what is really important then is that a member themselves can then compare, in this case, the same KPI 3 on the performance of all their properties in their portfolio. So they immediately know which properties are broadly in line with the benchmark. Assuming the benchmark, you're happy with the benchmark, you probably don't need to worry about those too much. Some are a lot better, some are a lot worse, and it's those properties you need to focus in on. So for instance, with Redevco, because we also do this for water and for waste, Redevco found that one of their properties sat way up the top in terms of its water usage. And no one had discovered for years that they had a big leak in the basement and they were just pouring water away. It had a practical use for that. And I think also, then this enables you to build a proper business case. I know from my own experience that you get nothing past the finance director unless you can build a business case, a case that says, if we spend X amount of money, we will actually have this return over a period of time. This sort of information enables you to build that business case. So in conclusion, I think we're going to be in for ever increasing regulation and tougher standards. There's no doubt about that. I think that a sustainable behaviour improves a company's environmental credentials in the eyes of its stakeholders. It is actually a source of competitive advantage, so it is not to be thrown away. And a building's energy performance in the first instance is beginning to take centre stage. Clearly water performance, all the other issues around sustainability will also take centre stage in due course. I think that's it. Thank you very much.